Welcome to the Wilkinson Files, an independent review of the findings of Dr. Sarah Wilkinson's report into the circumstances surrounding the closure of the Church of England's Independent Safeguarding Board, closed by its own Archbishops' Council after less than 3 years in operation. Over 6 episodes, each lasting less than 10 minutes, we will examine one aspect of Dr. Wilkinson's findings, one per day, each day, displaying on screen the relevant references to those paragraphs where you can read for yourself what she has said. We will be releasing one episode each day over the next 6 days. We will not be referencing any other documents other than Dr. Wilkinson's report, except where she herself has specifically referred to other information which is already out there in the public domain. Each episode has been prepared by a team with experience in safeguarding, who have examined Dr. Wilkinson's report in great detail to extract key points and to summarise the considerable detail she has provided.
Hello, my name is Clive Billenness. I'm a lay member of the General Synod of the Church of England. I'm a certified auditor with almost 30 years professional experience of auditing, and I'm also a qualified project and risk manager. I'm also an elected member of the Archbishops' Council Audit Committee representing the General Synod. This audit committee are supposed to have oversight of the Independent Safeguarding Board.
And I'm Martin Sewell, also a member of General Synod, where I've taken a particular interest in safeguarding matters. I was formerly a child protection lawyer and a member of the Law Society Specialist Children panel from its inception. My professional life spanned the evolution of safeguarding law from the Maria Colwell tragedy in 1973 through the Cleveland Report in 1987, and I've been in the room as every mistake was made in safeguarding practice. The secular world, fortunately, has learned from its mistakes, but I regret the Church continues not to do so. Over the past 5 episodes of the Wilkinson Files, we've examined different aspects of the inception and subsequent closure of the Church of England's Independent Safeguarding Board by the Archbishops' Council. In this final episode, we will be piecing together all the different threads to highlight the moments when things went wrong and where they could have been put right. When you look at events like air crashes, it normally emerges that there is no one thing that's caused the disaster, but an accumulation of errors and misjudgments, none of which would have individually led to the crash, but which together combined to make a tragedy inevitable. So Clive and I have consulted, and we've concluded that the same is true of the problems which led to the closure of the ISB. In order to prepare the Wilkinson Files, Clive and I have read Dr. Wilkinson's report over a dozen times, and as we did this, we each identified what we considered to be the critical moments and decisions which led to the closure of the ISB. Moments when different decisions might have prevented the outcomes which we've witnessed. In this episode, we'd like to share these with you.
And for this reason, we've entitled this episode, Magic Moments.
Magic Moments.
As we go through these today, the paragraph numbers from Dr. Wilkinson's report will be appearing on the screen below me. Now, the first magic moment I'd like to raise is the failure to properly set up the project to create the ISB in the first place. In episode 1, I pointed out how Dr. Wilkinson notes that the person put in charge of the formation of the project had no real experience in safeguarding, and I defended Archbishop Justin Welby against criticisms over the urgency of his desire to put the ISB into place by pointing out there is nothing wrong with trying to deliver something quickly, provided it's resourced properly. The magic moment here was that this apparently didn't happen. There is no reference to the project having a budget or additional support resources at times when these were necessary. Dr. Wilkinson has recommended that as and when another attempt is made to create an ISB, specialist external resources be brought in to deliver it. And my next magic moment is the failure to lay before, or perhaps communicate, to the Archbishops' Council the terms of reference which the ISB had agreed for itself and had also got an endorsement for from the National Safeguarding Steering Group, the NSSG, and also effectively from the National Safeguarding Panel, the NSP. Dr. Wilkinson says that these were passed to the Secretary-General, but although there are multiple references to them in other documents, they were never formally approved by the Council. Indeed, she notes that in May 2023, the Secretary-General acknowledged that they had taken their eye off the ball when the terms of reference were presented to the NSSG, and that a member of the ISB staff had on the 16th of November 2022 sent a link to this document to the Secretary-General, the National Safeguarding Team, the Church Legal Department and the Archbishops' Council Secretariat. Now try to remember this one because it's going to feature in 2 more of my magic moments.
Can I say here, Clive, that I do not regard this as the Secretary-General taking his eye off the ball. It's more a case of being asleep at the wheel and causing a near-fatal car crash. From that moment on, the ISB members were acting in the belief that they were acting in accordance with agreed protocols, but the Archbishops' Council knew nothing about this. As a result, each side was looking uncomprehendingly at each other and wondering, why are these people acting like this? Well, now we know why. It's like the one side taking to a sports playing field, following the rules of association football, and the other team working to the rugby union code, and each side accusing the other of breaking the rules, and the referee in the middle not sorting it out. And so we come to the magic moment at the meeting of the General Synod in February 22, when our now former colleague on Synod, Gavin Drake, tried to lay a motion before the General Synod expressing concern about the status and limitations of the ISB. That debate was brought up short when a former member of the Archbishops' Council, Reverend Simon Butler, proposed a motion to move to the next business and so stop discussion of the topic. Not only for that day, but potentially that would have lasted for another 5 years. In fairness, the chair that morning explained very clearly to Synod members the implications of voting for this, but a large majority did so. Their names are all a matter of public record and on the General Synod website, and there is a link to the YouTube page for episode 1.
Yeah, in fairness, it was a synod comprising 60% of new members who'd yet to learn the dark arts of what we call gaming synod. Now, since then, several members who voted for Next Business have actually been in contact to tell us that they now regret having done so, but an opportunity was lost to raise various concerns.
Absolutely, and it's a key moment, in my view.
And now we come to the magic moment which is closest to my heart. The refusal by the Archbishops' Council at their meeting on the 22nd of September 2022 to agree to a request by their Audit Committee to have an internal review of the creation and operation of the ISB. And I can tell you, dear viewers, that yes, it was me that first requested this, and several of my colleagues on the Audit Committee, as well as both Jasvinder and Steve Reeve, supported me over this. I think this is potentially the Titanic moment, since had an audit been performed when we requested it, under standard audit practice, the auditor would have asked for sight of the approved terms of reference of the ISB, and it would then have emerged that these had not been properly shared and approved. And as a result, one of the high priority recommendations of the audit would have been to draw the Archbishops' Council's attention to this, and to insist that they formally approve these basic ground rules. It was the continuation of this misconception by the ISB members that they were operating under approved terms of reference, while the Archbishops' Council did not know that these even existed, and both believed and acted as if they had a free hand to do as they liked. Dr. Wilkinson identifies the appointment of Meg Munn as the acting chair as the most significant short-term cause of the termination of the ISB contracts, and of course if at that point the Archbishops' Council had been aware of the arrangements in the terms of reference for the appointment, this might never have occurred.
So essentially, Clive, if everyone had known the terms of reference which had been agreed with them, the NSG was chaired and approved by the lead safeguarding bishop, that required a proper process to appoint a new member to the ISB, all the tension and all the suspicion just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, quite. I want to shift to an analogy of the NASA Challenger space shuttle disaster, and that was the moment when the O-rings failed. Now, we're not going to show you the explosion, I assure you, but this little piece of film reminds us what happened just before the disaster, and to me, this was the O-ring moment. As you can see, what started out as a microscopic failure very quickly grew into a major breach, which led ultimately to the loss of the Challenger spacecraft.
And this is a recurring theme. Proper professional practice, whether in audit or proper safeguarding practice, is rejected by an amateurish Archbishops Council that thinks it knows best.
Yeah, but in fact it doesn't.
The furore about the Audit Committee's request for an audit sprang into life again in February 2023 when Synod member Professor Helen King asked at the meeting of the General Synod whether the ISB had been subject to scrutiny by the Audit Committee, and was told by the chair of the Audit Committee and member of Archbishops Council, Mrs Maureen Cole, that it had not. She then added, and we have to say inaccurately, that the Audit Committee had no power to conduct an audit of the ISB operation, an answer she was obliged to subsequently correct on the Synod record in writing. An attempt by another member of the Audit Committee to clarify the exact situation for Synod members to understand was then cut off by the chair of the sessions at Synod, and he was prevented from obtaining an answer. And as I recall, Clive, you tried to intervene, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. If you watch the YouTube recording of the exchanges, which took place on Monday the 6th of February, and there's a link on the YouTube page for this episode so that you can see for yourself, I did try to factually correct what was being said, but sadly it made no difference.
It's always a problem to get people with the real expertise into our debates at the right point.
And now I'm going to refer to a magic moment which was in the written evidence submitted to Dr. Wilkinson, but which did not appear in her final report.
Evidence submitted by?
Me. The Archbishops Council Audit Committee met again on the 2nd of March 2023 after this debacle, and I first expressed concern that the chair of our Audit Committee should be apparently acting as an advocate for the Council. But I was told that it was not open to me as a member to question how the committee had been structured by the Archbishops Council with a chair who was also part of the Council's decision-making process. I also suggested at that meeting that the Secretary-General engage an external mediator, and although he undertook to consider this, as we heard in episode 2, when the same thing was suggested by Jasvinder Sangera 3 months later, the Secretary-General declined to do this.
I'm actually quite shocked at this, and the phrase which comes to mind is marking their own homework. I'm also bound to wonder if the Secretary-General had listened to the requests being made for an external mediator, whether things might have worked out rather differently. This might be a good point to mention the controversies surrounding the allegations of data breaches by the chair, Maggie Atkinson. Dr. Wilkinson records that based on documentary and interview evidence, I find that it had not been possible to determine in advance of the contracts being signed whether the ISB members were data controllers or data processors, because their operational relationships and systems had not been defined. So again, we have structural uncertainty, and plainly the independent member and survivor advocate placed primary importance on respecting survivor data. For them, compromising that integrity was a clear red line for preserving ISB credibility and victim confidence. So there we have another of our magic moments, and linked to it was a damaging corollary. With the controversy over the complaints against the chair, relations and the work suffered. Maggie Atkinson was eventually stood back for several months. This was a part-time outfit, and with a major player out of action, progress languished. Plainly, those with responsibility for keeping the show on the road did nothing. Two part-timers were never going to be able to take up the slack, and Maggie's primary role of developing a vision for Phase 2 didn't happen because she wasn't there. There was insufficient resource, no leadership from the church to give them the talent time which that aspect of the work required. That failure to supplement an already under-resourced ISB was crucial to the later complaint from Archbishops Council that the ISB members had failed to advance phase 2 of the project adequately. It's like the defendant who murdered his parents and then asked for mercy on the grounds that he was an orphan.
Now, steady on, Martin. Okay, so who's going to talk about what we agree is perhaps the biggest magic moment of all? The events between midday and 1 p.m. on the 21st of June 2023. The last chance which existed to prevent this whole story becoming a complete disaster.
Well, I will. And as we highlighted in episode 3, at 12:03 on the 21st of June, an email was sent to the members of the ISB by the Secretary General, William Nye, informing them that their contracts would be terminated on the 5th of July 2023, which coincidentally would have been just before the General Synod was next due to meet. We talked about this in episode 3, and that a public announcement was going to be made just 57 minutes later. 16 minutes later, Steve Reeves emailed Mr. Nye urging caution in making this announcement when ISB staff and members were not available, and he was concerned about the impact on survivors' safety if they were to hear about this first in the media.
And I think we had here that these were already identified as victims who had been multiply abused, both initially within the church and subsequently by bad church complaint handling.
Quite. And these were people with known vulnerabilities, many of whom were known to need special consideration and care. But Dr. Wilkinson tells us that Mr. Nye replied to Steve Reeves saying that arrangements were in hand to inform survivors. At 12:42, Reeves responded stressing that the harm could be significant and the announcement isn't urgent. I think we emphasise it was not urgent. 11 minutes later, Mr. Nye replied that even if not every survivor could be identified to be informed, this would be the case whenever the announcement was made.
Yeah, now, we know that Archbishop Welby told a General Synod member in July that this timing was driven by a need to get papers to the General Synod out on time. And so at 1 p.m, the National Safeguarding team emailed an announcement out to their press mailing list, and yesterday we heard about the impact that this had on survivors, so we need not go into that again here. But here, right at the end, was a final chance to mitigate the outcomes of the whole story. Do please note that Dr. Wilkinson's report does not say that Steve Reeves was asking to delay the termination of the ISB contracts, only the announcement for survivor-centred reasons.
And she heavily criticises the events of 21 June 2023.
So here we have lots of moments where the failure of the ISB could, in our opinion, have been prevented. But they weren't.
Well, Clive, you and I have spent many hours poring over this evidence and summarising it. We now leave it to those responsible for the future of safeguarding in the Church of England to decide how to avoid making the same mistakes again.
Yeah, that's right. If this was an air crash investigation, I think the final verdict would be that there were multiple pilot errors.
But it's not for us to decide who the pilot or pilots were and whether they should ever be allowed to fly again.
Yeah, we leave that to you, the viewers.
And so this is the end of the Wilkinson Files.
Except it's not.
The Sheepfold Project will be producing a longer documentary in April, in which we will be speaking to some of the people involved in the story of the ISB and catching up with what has happened since Dr. Wilkinson published her report. So join us soon
For the Wilkinson Files, the sequel.